Hello S2 and welcome to your first lesson on World War One. So in your history jotters, if you want to take a new heading, which is World War One, 1914 to 1918. So this is our next topic, which we are now moving on to in S2 history. Now, underneath your heading of World War One, to start with, what we'd like to do is try and write down what you already know about World War One. So to create a mind map with any words, names or pictures that you associate with the First World War. Now don't worry if you're not sure about anything to do with World War One. If you don't know anything, that's fine, but just write down anything at all that you know about World War One. Now, as mentioned, that could be any words, any names, any pictures at all to do with the First World War. So you want to pause the video at this point just to complete this task. Now, what we're aiming to do today is to establish some of your prior knowledge of World War One, which we've just done there as well. So you've written down what you already know about World War One, and to introduce the idea of war and what life was like in 1914 in Britain before the war actually started. Now, we've got here think, pair, share, but obviously you're doing this from home, so what we like to think about is a modern conflict such as the Afghanistan or Iraq wars, for example. And again, your jotters, try and write down, why do countries go to war? What's the reasons for countries going to war? And try and write down as many possible reasons as you can. Now, war can break out between different countries for a number of different reasons. Now, in 1914, war began in Europe for many of the same causes. So there was religious reasons why the war started. There was resources or the search for raw materials. Things like oil causes countries to compete with each other. You have political reasons and financial reasons why the war actually started. Now, World War One started in 1914, lasting until 1918. Now, World War One is known as the first truly international conflict. It involves a lot of countries across the world, which we will be looking at. Now, the amount of people killed in World War One goes into the millions. Now, this is just 5 of the main countries that were involved in World War One. There is other countries that were involved, which we'll look at in a moment, and there was obviously a lot more people that died as well due to the conflict. However, this is the main countries here. So what we have here is the countries and the numbers of dead. So we've got Britain, France, Russia, Germany and Austria-Hungary. Now, Britain, numbers of dead, 761,231. France has well over a million, Russia well over a million, Germany around 2 million, and Austria-Hungary 1.1 million. So what you're looking to do is to copy this table into your jotter. Then below it, write a passage describing the numbers killed underneath your table and think about how this makes you feel. Now, World War One was the first truly international conflict, as we have mentioned. That's why there was millions of people that were killed in this conflict. As mentioned, there were a lot of other countries involved in World War One. In total, there was 34 countries officially involved. Now, these are the major players on either side. So we have the Allied forces here. So the main countries in the Allied forces are Australia, Belgium, Canada, France, Greece, India, Italy, Japan, Montenegro, New Zealand, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Serbia, South Africa, the United Kingdom and the United States. And they're fighting in World War One against the Central Powers, who include Austria, Bulgaria, Germany, Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, which is modern day Turkey. Now, some of these countries contribute more soldiers and more people fighting than other countries do, depending on their involvement in the war, but that's why it's known as World War One, because it was the first truly international conflict that involved lots of different countries. Now, in terms of Scots casualties, the number of dead, it's hard to put an exact number on the amount of people that died in World War One, but records show the closest estimate we have is that for Scotland there was around about 85,500 people that died. The Scottish population was depleted by around about 3% during the war, and the names of those lost are listed at the Scottish National War Memorial. You can see the names of the people there. Also, if you look around even in your local area, you'll see that there'll be memorials at local churches, there'll be memorials at local town centres that will usually have names of people who fought and died in World War One and even World War Two and other wars that will be found around local communities on certain monuments. Also, as I mentioned, in churches, if you look in churches, it will usually mention some of the members of the church who fought in the World War and died. Now, what we're thinking about next is what was life like in 1914, so just before war starts. So, in the middle of your jotters, what you're looking to do is draw the following mind map, which is titled Life in Britain Before World War One. Now, using the information on the next two slides, what you're looking to do is write down at least 2 key points for each of the 6 points around your mind map. So, we're looking to find out what life in Britain before World War One was like in terms of Victorian family size, the living conditions that people had at this time, the population in Britain, what that was like, education, what was education like in Britain before World War One, what was healthcare like, and industry, what were the major industries in Britain before World War One. So again, if you want to pause the video at this point and to copy this mind map into your jotter. Now, firstly, we're thinking about life in Britain before the war. Life in Britain was very, very different in 1914. Now, if we think about families to start with, families in Victorian Britain usually had 7 or 8 children. Okay, they were big, big families. However, by the outbreak of the war in 1914, families were beginning to be a bit smaller and more like the typical size of families today. Living conditions in Britain at this time were not the best. Now, in British cities in particular, they were very, very harsh and conditions were not always good. So there's a lot of overcrowding in cities. Factories spilled out a lot of smoke into large communities, which meant the air was very polluted. There was high tenement flats, and that meant people struggled to get enough sunlight on a day-to-day basis. Also, a lot of people who lived in these tenement flats never had an indoor toilet, so they would need to go and share a toilet with other people in their local tenements. So you could have up to 70 or 80 people sharing one toilet, for example. So it was very, very overcrowded and conditions were not the best. Also, the British population in 1914, the British population had actually grown rapidly in the period up to just before 1914. Now, many people now lived in the larger cities where there were lots of jobs in factories. So before 1914, years before, mainly a lot of people had lived in, say, the countryside and rurally, but as industry started to progress and jobs were created in the cities and towns, a lot more people moved there to live and to work. So from these points here, obviously the thing about family size, you're looking to add in 2 points around your mind map for that. Living conditions, 2 points around your mind map for living conditions, and then the population, 2 points around your mind map for that. So you might have something like this so far. So I've just done these first 2 for you. So Victorian family size, so you could have added in that there were bigger families, 7 or 8 children in the families, and that by 1914 families were getting smaller. Living conditions, you could have mentioned that there was lots of overcrowding and that there was a lack of clean air / sunlight. Okay, so that is what you're aiming to do. So you'll also have information there on population, which you could add in, and then we're about to find out a bit more about education, health, and industry. Okay, so in terms of education, although education was provided for everyone from the age of 5 to 13, secondary schools existed mostly in the towns and were dominated by the middle class. Poorer people rarely got the chance of quality education because poorer children in particular had to go and work to try and support their families. So you had very, very young children working at this time and not really in school getting an education. In terms of healthcare, now we know already that there was a lot of poor housing, and ultimately due to the fact that there was poor housing, this led to problems with sanitation, with ventilation, with light. Now many families shared just one toilet among them. In Scotland, if you lived in a single end, one room flat in Glasgow, you were 3 or 4 times more likely to die than someone living in a bigger house. Now for lots of diseases at this time, there was no treatment for any of them, so a lot of people picked up diseases and died at quite a young age. Life expectancy was not as high in places across Scotland at this time, particularly for the poorer people. Industry. Now there was an increase in factories in inner cities due to the Industrial Revolution that Britain had went on. So Britain improved their industries and were now inventing new things like steam trains, for example. So there's a lot of factories, a lot more factories, and Britain was producing a lot more goods and technology as well, like the steam trains. So again, you're looking to use the information here on education, health, and industry to add in points around your mind map. Now, numeracy extension, so going back to the table that you've drawn your jotters of casualties that you copied earlier on, what we're looking for you to do is to draw a bar chart to display this information. Now think carefully about the scale that you're going to use, and remember to give your axis labels and give the graph a title and include a key for your axis as well. Okay, so to sum up what we've done today, what we're looking for you to do is just to write down one thing you've learned this lesson and write down one question that you would like the answer to as we progress through the World War I course. So what would you like to know? Now that could be about anything to do with World War I in particular that you would like to know. Okay, in terms of uploading work via Teams, now you can either take a picture of your jotter with the work you have done, or if you have done this work on a Word document, then obviously you can upload the Word document. It's up to you. So what you're looking to upload, what should be in your jotter, you should have the mind map on what you know about World War One. Again, don't worry if you're not sure, you didn't know anything about World War One. 2, why countries go to war, so some points that you can make about why countries actually go to war, why countries fight. 3, the table and the passage below, so you should have copied in the table on the amount of people that were killed in the war and filled out the questions below. 4, the mind map on life in Scotland before World War One, you should have that filled out with 2 points for each. 5, you should have drawn your bar chart on the number of deaths. And then 6, the plenary task, so writing down one thing that you've learned from the lesson and a question that you would like to answer. Now, we're not expecting you to do this whole lesson in one sitting. You can split this up in terms of doing half the lesson maybe one day and the other half a following day. If you have any questions about anything covered in this PowerPoint, then please just ask your teacher. Thank you.